All right. Well, on the Bitcoin network, as far as how the Bitcoin network is going to be able to handle the number of transactions that would be required for it to really reach a worldwide scale, we depend, at least on Bitcoin Core, primarily on layer 2 scaling solutions most directly. The Lightning Network is the one that gets the most attention. And this week we had some scary news in regards to the Lightning Network. One of the core developers working on it basically threw his hands up and said, "I quit. This is there's a big, giant vulnerability here that could be really damaging, and I can't keep doing this anymore."
Yikes.
So yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate and kind of dramatic,
Yeah.
especially because it hasn't actually been exploited by anyone, and it's a really complex attack. I actually spent a few minutes trying to write notes for myself to try to really explain. In order to explain the attack, I kind of need to explain Lightning Network first. It's too complicated to explain in any kind of short way. But to some degree, it has to do with the fact that in order for money to get from one party to another, unless you're very lucky that you have a direct connection with them, which you can create, but it takes some extra effort. For the most part, Lightning Network transactions need to be routed from one node to another node to another node to another node. In order for that to happen without any of the nodes along the way stealing the money, there are these kind of complicated HTLCs, hash time locked
Smart contracts.
hash time locked contracts. Exactly. There are smart contracts on the Bitcoin network that basically can either be unlocked if a preimage of a hash is provided or a time period expires, a time goes by. Bitcoin network doesn't actually know time, so really it just means block. If we hit a certain block, something expires. And so using a combination of those two different things, you can kind of create a system where in order for one person to redeem their, if I'm the middleman and I'm relaying along $5, in order for me to participate in that system, I have to kind of write a check for that $5 to the next person before I've actually been able to make a deposit of the $5 from the previous person. But what I do have from them is I have kind of like an unsigned check. I have like a version of a check that I can make a deposit on once everything goes through. So as soon as the final party gets the transaction, they're going to basically send along some cryptographic information to the party before them that lets them unlock the deposit that they've got, and then vice versa, or all along the way, all the way back to the very end, so that everyone along the way, all they did was relay the money. And generally, the concept works. Basically, a weakness has been theoretically figured out where if two sides of it, if the person who's sending to me as the router and the person who I'm sending to as the recipient are colluding with each other and play some somewhat complex games around timing and putting up new transactions that have a higher transaction fee than the previously disclosed transactions, and they do this all just right while I'm not entirely paying attention to some other aspects that are going on, it's possible for them to disrupt the routing process and basically have me spend the $5 to the next person and lose the ability to collect the $5 for myself. So that is both would break the underlying functionality of the system itself, and it would also mean that when I'm just like a participant that's trying to help this whole thing out, and I'm not supposed to be putting up any risk because I'm not actually the counterparty involved. I'm not the person that's sending or receiving. I'm just someone along the way, and I could be deprived access to money myself. So it's a scary attack for sure. Let me read from the article here. It theoretically may allow sophisticated attackers to execute a transaction relay jamming attack and target a crucial Lightning Network component known as the HTLC. Disrupt the normal flow of transactions, causing delays or preventing them from being processed as expected. And that kind of misses the lead that there is actually a potential risk of loss of funds. This article says that there have been patches that have been deployed across the Lightning Network and a whole bunch of different implementations of it that have adopted it. However, the particular dev involved who left, he basically said he's not entirely sure that they will work and that some more kind of fundamental work needs to happen. Like a more complicated version of the attack could still be mounted, theoretically at least. Again, amongst all these disclosures was also the fact that over at least in the last 10 months, I don't know where that threshold comes from. It's just the time period that they've been monitoring it. I don't know what. It's never been either done or even experimented with on the actual Bitcoin Live network. So who knows? And then someone else who kind of does it, and I'll include this in the show notes if you want to actually have an understanding. This does a great job of kind of recapping exactly how Lightning Network is supposed to work, and also how this attack works with some nice little visual aids, which is great. But he summarizes with, this attack isn't easy. Pulling it off involves opening 2 channels with the victim, routing a payment through the victim, successfully replacement cycling the victim's HTLC timeouts for delta blocks, and all that without the victim discovering the HTLC pre-image transaction. But it is hard to solve completely. There's been a lot of hand-wringing about this, that it's literally a limit of the speed of light, and that this is just something that literally can't be solved. And if you did solve it, someone else goes really nuts into this by saying if this was solvable, then it would break the thing that makes public keys secure. Like, the math involved in solving it would undermine the whole concept of public keys, and so we would lose the security layer on Bitcoin.
Gosh.
That's their opinion, kind of. I mean, I don't know if that's really been borne out as true, but
that's really scary.
Yeah. So we'll see. Again, no one has actually done this attack, and so it might not actually be something that can be done in real world. But at the same time, I've always argued that my biggest concern about proof of stake is that it creates complexity and cost to pull off an attack, because you have to have a whole lot of collusion. You have to be able to separate a whole bunch of people from the actual internet and give them a fake version of the internet. It's a really complex attack to pull something off like that, and kind of a theoretical version of a proof of stake attack. But complexity doesn't stop heists. You know what I mean? If the payoff is high enough, and you can, it's Ocean's 11. You need
I
to
was
get.
just going to say that we all love a good heist movie.
Exactly.
And
like,
if the treasure is
pot,
high enough,
exactly,
right?
The whole premise of the movie is the pot is high enough that you can hire experts in all these different parts, so that you can have a complex attack. Mm-hmm. That you would hire a very different set of people to pull off this kind of an attack.
Is really like a social attack in a big way,
to some degree, right?
Exactly. You need to compromise certain.
You're compromising individuals
mm-hmm.
rather than providers of electricity and hardware and stuff like that, or
but
people
Lightning
that have
isn't a
access
proof of
to
stake
the
network.
No, it's not. I'm using the analogy to say Lightning doesn't have as simple of a security mechanism as Bitcoin does. Bitcoin says the only way you get to have any amount of administrative control over the blockchain is if you have the most proof of work in this particular period of time. That's it. Plain and simple. There are no complex attacks. There's no complex anything kind of thing. And like proof of stake, Lightning's approach to handling its own security is with some complexity. And the initial implementation of it with this basic concept of HTLCs isn't super complex. Like, it's somewhat complex for sure, but especially if solving this requires adding even more complexity, all that really does is just kind of solve it by making it more obscure, or that you would need to have a more advanced attack, etc.
The HTLC, the hash
time lock,
was pretty elegant in its simplicity. Like, it's pretty smart. It reminds me of those credit cards that you pay to
like a prepaid debit card?
A prepaid card, yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, basically.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how you open a Lightning channel. It's like you put in the amount of money that you're going to allow that you're either allowed to use, or that's allowed to flow through your relay, something like that.
Both, exactly.
And
because
therefore,
the sender of the relay needs to put up the money in advance before they can catch it from the other side.
That's how you have skin in the game.
Exactly.
And it's something I've wondered about, if it will hold back Lightning's adoption, or how that barrier to entry will affect adoption. Right. Because if you're going to move, the kind of money that you would need to move through that system to handle if Lightning is going to be the way that Bitcoin can be used for everyday transactions and have the kind of throughput as Visa, you would need relay channels with
enormous amounts of money.
Huge amounts of money.
Right.
Where does that come from? How does that happen? How do we get from where we are to there? I don't know.
Right.
Interesting.
And if this means that it also needs to introduce an enormous amount more complexity than it otherwise would have needed to, then that might, make it all fall down. So I don't know. I still have hopes because, like you said, it does seem like a pretty elegant solution to this, and it does ultimately depend. Aside from these potential vectors, most of its underlying mechanism depends on the security of the Bitcoin blockchain itself, and which just means you can deploy it on any other type of blockchain similar to Bitcoin, and you'd get the security of that underlying thing. That's why people started talking about base layer and then layers above kind of thing. So that's a smart way of approaching it, I think. But if it introduces extra vectors on top, that's not.
Yep.
So
yep. We'll see.
We'll see.
It'll be an
We'll
interesting
see. Exactly.
interesting thing to watch.